For myself, learning any new skill or idea and applying it in my life or in my practice is challenging, and it poses two specific questions of me. The first thing is, am I doing this correctly? And then, if I'm doing it correctly, am I doing it good enough? These concerns are amplified if it involves doing it with other people, but I'm sure these sorts of concerns are not present for me alone. Then these concerns are amplified given the context where I've mostly utilised my newly learnt narrative skills, which has been working in a psychiatric hospital and with people who are part of a mental health service. Part of this concern I have is because I know I'm occupying a truly privileged position of sharing in other people's lives, receiving stories of suffering, but also of hope and triumph. This kind of work causes me to experience some pressure, given the serious nature of it. And earlier on, I felt a big sense of anxiety about implementing narrative practice. I was a bit concerned that I could not or was not showing fidelity to its origins. Specifically, I was concerned about squaring narrative practice with the other framework I had learnt to work from, which is intentional peer support, or IPS. The practice of IPS involves the therapeutic and intentional use of myself and my lived experience. In doing this, I was worried that I was straying too far from the intended nature of the narrative practitioner-consultee relationship. Furthermore, I was worried that I was not being de-centered due to the emphasis in intentional peer support of co-creation and co-learning. And I was also concerned that given the often hectic and fast-paced nature of a psychiatric hospital, it was not going to be the most fertile space to do narrative influence work. And in this hospital, I've been employed as a peer support worker. The word peer meaning that I share at least some like or similar experiences with those I provide, but also receive support from. In my context, this is having experiences within the mental health system. And I come to this role in a place that is primarily not informed by study or qualifications, but the kind of expertise that has been acquired through my lived experience. Now, whilst we all bring our life experiences to our work, with peer support, we often do this in a way where we bring our extraordinary life experiences, and we do so in a way that is intentional. I'll spend some time today talking about using both of these complementary but sometimes contradictory approaches. I'll start by exploring a little bit about intentional peer support. There are 3 principles and 4 tasks of IPS. The tasks are connection, worldview, mutuality, and moving towards. Firstly, we establish a connection in our relationship. From there, we explore each other's worldview in order to learn what informs us and where we're coming from. And from this, we intend to establish mutuality, an experience where we are both as equal as we can be, partners, listening and learning from each other. Through this particular kind of relationship, we are then positioned in a way where we can support one another to move towards what we want in life. The principles of intentional peer support are from helping to learning together. Now, I don't feel particularly confident that I can actually help people. Instead, through peer support, we undergo a process of learning about ourselves and from each other. The second principle is from individual to relationship. Traditional support models have placed an emphasis on the person seeking or receiving support, whereas IPS encourages us to develop a relationship where we are accomplices in exploring our values, problems, experiences, and more. And the third principle is from fear to hope and possibility. Now, this principle and the task in IPS of moving towards can be a bit tricky when it comes to incorporating narrative therapy. Moving towards and moving from fear to hope and possibility is typically framed as looking to the future and not moving away from symptoms and problems that people are experiencing. Whereas narrative therapy encourages us to name and explore problems, which initially can seem a little contradictory to the intentional peer support tasks, which do not place much emphasis upon symptoms or difficulties that people may be experiencing. But I know this to be something that people find extremely useful. The trick has been when exploring problems that we experience, we do so in a way that attempts to lessen fear and encourages hope for future possibility. Applying narrative practice to my work over the course of the year proved to be challenging as I attempt to intertwine it with my current framework for practice, IPS. And as with many things, over time this has become easier as I've become more confident in the practice. It's also become easier and more useful due to a shift in understanding on how I would implement narrative practice. And over the course of this year, through readings and reflection, it's allowed for me to develop a unique way of practicing in a narrative way. I'm innovating it and practicing a way that is uniquely my own and contextualized to those I work with and who I am. And I hope to detail a few of these practices that I've used this year and explore how, through the peer support model, ideas from narrative therapy can be furthered. People in psychiatric hospitals and public mental health services have often had their autonomy literally taken away from them due to involuntary treatment. When I say their autonomy has been literally taken away, I mean often they are brought into treatment, shackled or handcuffed, and with the use of force. These people have also had the autonomy to shape their narratives and their stories about themselves removed. And I've found people in this environment very willing to engage in reauthoring conversations. And this is furthered by the fact that both I and the people I'm talking to are considered to have mental illnesses. And typically this mental illness is considered to exist within ourselves. The peer support model, influenced by narrative therapy, uniquely allows for us together to question dominant discourses around illness and attempt to do away with single-storied accounts of experience, such as depressed, borderline, or schizophrenic. I say it uniquely allows for us to do this because the peer support model allows me to position myself as one who is connected with them at this point in time through a shared experience. And that shared experience is often psychiatric hospitalization, but it's often much more than that. This has allowed for me to hear, but also to be shared with me, the neglected but potentially significant events and experiences of their lives which contribute to their double-storied existence. Intentional peer support has also encouraged me to implement the skill of listening for the untold story. This involves listening for assumptions made and hearing how the person has learned to tell their story the way that they have. For myself, the peer support model allows me to share my experiences of being storied as a person with a mental illness. Although this story to some extent resonates with me, it fails to take into account other aspects that comprise me. Peer support allows me to model the kinds of attitudes and beliefs that narrative therapy supports. Now, there's been a quote that has stuck with me this year, and that's, "Never before has the sense of failure to be an adequate person been so freely available to people, and never before has it been so willingly and routinely dispensed." Many people that I've spoken to this year have confided in me that they say that I am a failure, or they say to me that they feel like a failure, or that they feel they have failed as a person. Often, I also feel very much like a failure, insofar as I have not achieved many of the expectations placed upon me by others, and also the expectations that I've placed upon myself. For example, I fail to routinely shave or shower, or go to appointments for my mental health, call my family, not swear, not self-harm, not smoke, not drink, not take drugs, and so much more. However, as Jack Halberstam notes throughout their book, The Queer Art of Failure, there is something to failing. We will wander, improvise, fall short, and move in circles. We will lose our way, our cars, our agenda, and possibly our minds. But in losing, we will find another way of making meaning. Talking about discourses of failure with people who consider themselves a failure is one thing, but for me, the peer support model allows me to say to others, if I am a failure, maybe that's okay, because I turned out pretty good, and look at all the incredible things that have happened along the way. And really, perhaps that means I'm not a failure at all. I can share with others not theoretical knowledge around discourses of failure, but embodied knowledge. And this embodied knowledge is not intended specifically to role model or to dictate behaviours, but to offer hope and encourage possibilities that a non-peer support model cannot do in the same way. The intentional peer support concept of listening for the untold story is similar to the narrative practice of double listening, whereas Michael White states, people find that there is space for them to express their experience of whatever it is that troubles them. And as well as this, it is in this context they have the opportunity to explore the unstated. My ability to do this has been strengthened through the knowledge of and sharing with people admitted to hospital aspects of the narrative therapy Charter of Storytelling rights. In particular, that no one is a passive recipient of trauma. People always respond, and people always protest injustice. And it is acknowledged that people who have been diagnosed with a mental illness are overwhelmingly people who have experienced trauma or hardship. Yet many accounts of it, including mine, recount a kind of passivity and do not acknowledge what we did throughout and afterwards. An example of this, which resonated with my own experience, was hearing of a young boy's experience of the bullies. He recounted experiences which were upsetting and moving for us both, and in his recount, it served to evoke some of the feelings and memories that he had associated with these events. My knowledge of trauma-informed care meant that I was not wanting to re-traumatize people when talking with them. However, it was through my understanding of double listening and the associated double story development that meant we were able to resist this. After this person had disclosed a story of their hardship regarding the bullies, I was able to recount a similar experience I had had. I was then intentional in disclosing that I and we did not passively experience this, and then shared in some of the ways which I had resisted it. It was through this that we were then able to explore the fact that he too had resisted in various ways. A way which this boy resisted was through the creation of music, which in some part served to reflect, but also to resist the difficult experiences he had had. The boy had recounted to me that in conversations with other people, he felt that they did not get it. Whereas through the peer support model, I was able to share my hardship, which had created the conditions for us to explore the double-storied nature of this event. Many people are skeptical of mental health services and service providers, including peer support workers, and understandably so. As a result, it has sometimes been a challenge to encourage people to fully engage with the process of externalizing problems. I've attempted to incorporate this into my own language, referring to problems in a way that does externalize them, and have encouraged others to do so. And the following is an account of a conversation which I had with someone who I knew had an interest in illustration, and at the time they were drawing some images which to me looked a bit dark. And Gabriel had said to me that he was having lots of bad thoughts all the time, which made him feel like he didn't want to be alive. And I said to him, these thoughts, Could you tell me a bit more about them? And he responded to me in a way which told me he had had much experience within mental health services by saying he was having suicidal thoughts, and he said no more about it. So I said to him, I'm wondering if we can try something a bit novel. And I said, I too have experienced something similar, which I've come to refer to as die thoughts. I'm wondering if we can give them some life in a bit of an odd way. How would you feel about drawing them with me? He then said to me unconfidently, sure. I explained the notion of externalizing conversations with him, and we began to draw. Now that together we had a shared understanding of this, Gabrielle drew an image of a kind of angel and myself a series of birds. Together, we then had some distance from this problem, which allowed us to discuss the ways we had resisted it and attempted to lessen its presence. In this scenario, I just don't feel that if we were not utilizing the tasks of intentional peer support, we would have been able to undertake and see all the benefits of doing this activity. Without a strong connection, a mutual relationship where we understand each other, we might not have entered such an intimate narrative practice. This has proved true many times where it has been our relationship and our ability to get it that meant we were able to have such meaningful conversations. You know, people have said to me, you listen because you know what it is like. Hamilton, I did not know that there were other ways of seeing things. People have often said to me that to some extent I get it. I don't know what it is. But when people say that, it shows that we have a particular kind of relationship, and through that relationship, certain things are possible. Peer support work and I have largely been informed by principles of the consumer, survivor, ex-patient movement. This movement, along with many others within the broader civil rights movement and narrative therapy, aim to question hegemony and challenge elitist discourse. And it is also the people who are current service users who are very able to do this. A specific example, although by no means an isolated example, is a young man confiding to me that the doctors don't know shit. We explored this a bit more and revealed that for this person, medical professionals had failed to provide any useful or meaningful interventions or explanations of his experience. And I too thought similarly that my experience has been sometimes they do not know. And I don't claim to know much more, but our peer relationship and the tools provided by narrative practice allow for us to try and work it out together. I've attempted to give some insight into the potential benefits of using the lived experience of mental illness and working from a peer perspective in conjunction with narrative therapy. However, it is important I also highlight some of the difficulties that I experience and may be the case for others who work from a peer perspective that is influenced by narrative therapy. I've spoken about how narrative therapy and peer support principles can be combined to produce some sort of unique practice. But it is what creates this uniqueness that is also one of the challenges that it presents. One of the problems I experience has meant that often I'm very cynical, critical, and sometimes hold false beliefs about people and the world more generally. This can distort my ability to accurately interpret events and other people. And I've thought, is this really the sort of person that should be involved in supporting and working with others who feel similarly? How can I support them and remain hopeful and work towards overcoming problems when I personally am heavily influenced by the problems I experience, as well as feelings of hopelessness? Now, this is particularly difficult when working from a peer perspective, because these experiences that I just talked about are not sidelined, but they can be brought to the forefront as a valuable tool for connection and learning. In this relationship, I have permission to break the fourth wall. I'm able to say how I am feeling. I am able to share difficult experiences that I have had and will continue to have. And in this relationship, we can support each other through hardship. I can say to others who feel similarly, I don't necessarily know what the point of living is, but I'd like to know. Many times this year, I have doubted my ability to work with people like myself. However, I still believe I can work in hopeful ways with people, even if I'm not necessarily hopeful for my own life. Some of the problems I face have the special ability to make me dislike myself, but create the conditions where I am especially sensitive to the experiences of others and accordingly feel compelled to support them. This is an unfortunate irony, and it is not lost on me and other people like me. Other people have shared with me that they have had similar feelings as well, which is why a few narrative skills in particular have served me well when this problem has presented itself. They are asking people what they might say or might have said to someone else who is experiencing something similar, asking people what others might have said about their experience, and encouraging people to share their experiences of hardship and success with others. An example of this is me and 6 other inpatients, notably people who had spent considerable time in hospital, produced the document Young People's Skills for Getting Through a Hospital Admission. Because in that moment, they may not be showing lots of care for themselves, but we were caring for others. Peer work presents itself as a relationship dynamic where both parties are equal and work in a mutual way. And this is intended to be in contrast to traditional relationships where there is a service provider and a service user. However, any sort of critical thinking about peer work will reveal that it too can have an unjust power dynamic. And this is a few reasons that it is not actually an equal relationship. I am paid to be in that relationship. It is in a hospital where I leave and I go home whenever I want. My peer cannot do this. And I voluntarily enter the relationship. My peer is often in that environment where they meet me due to the enforcement of the state. So these are some of the evidence that shows it's not a fundamentally equal relationship. But this does not mean we cannot be peers if we have had some shared experiences, such as hardship or hospitalisation. However, this dynamic is further complicated this year when I've introduced formal therapeutic knowledges. One of narrative therapy's strengths is its simplicity, but it does not take away from its formality. This can and has proved challenging as I attempt to fit maps and skills into environments where people are involuntarily treated. This can be challenging because peer support roles have often provided people with a space to get relief from traditional ideas about treatment, recovery, and mental illness. And I've found one remedy for this is allowing for truly consumer-led interactions. If someone expresses their frustrations about the sort of conversations we're having, I ought to be led by this. And this sometimes means dropping it. And I've heard, Hamilton, I just need you to listen and be here with me right now. And I do listen, but narrative therapy positions me to listen in a unique kind of way. Perhaps many people who have been diagnosed with a mental illness would prefer that they can really have a peer to talk with. Although I'm a peer in many cases, my theoretical understandings of therapeutic modalities can prove a barrier to our peer relationship. And sometimes this makes me feel like a bit of a fraud. So I'm not really a peer to the people I'm working with due to the huge amounts of privilege and education I possess. But then it makes me think that due to some of the difficulties that I experience in my life and continue to experience, I couldn't really be a therapist. And I found this to be a tough realization. Remembering conversations with people highlight relationships that I have lost Teams of life can expose my isolation. Reauthoring conversations can reveal the unhelpful narratives I have about myself. This makes enacting narrative-influenced peer support work hard. However, peer support work encourages me to have these genuine responses and share them because they are real, valid, and important. And peer support is a mutual relationship. I am not there to be a conduit for questions and inquiry into people's lives, but in a peer support relationship is intended that we are working things out together. Narrative-influenced peer support is a model which can strengthen what is possible with peer support. It gives us more tools to be radical. The peer model can provide people relatable examples about what it looks like to lessen the influence of a problem. Relatable examples about breaking free from the constraints of normality and expectation. It means that not only are people supported by meaningful maps and activities, but experience it provided by someone who at least to some extent gets it. And that's why narrative therapy can be a successful complement to peer support work.